Hi, I'm Lisa Bradshaw. Thanks for joining the show with me today. My guest, I've been wanting to interview him for a while. I see him around town. He's newly retired, and I think he has some great stories to share as well as what he's up to these days. Jim West, he was an East Wenatchee Police Department, a member of the police department, and then switched to Wenatchee eventually, and is retired and now is a private investigator. So I think you have lots of great stories. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you.
We've been talking about it for a while. We run into each other
Yes.
around town, so I'm glad to have you here.
Yes, I'm glad to be here.
So you're retired. We're going to get to that. But
Okay.
let's talk first for people who may recognize you perhaps for a routine traffic violation or any number of things. You started out in the East Wenatchee Police Department. How long ago?
That was back in 1992.
1992.
Started, yeah.
Is that the first job you had in that career?
Yes.
With the police department here?
That's where I started, was in East Wenatchee, 1992.
Were you from here?
No, actually, I grew up on Whidbey Island, and I went to college at Central, and I learned about, Eastern Washington, and never left.
It was a whole new...
Yeah. You actually get 4 seasons.
Don't you find that when you meet somebody who hasn't been to Washington, they just assume you live in the rain?
Yeah.
That everywhere
yeah.
it rains here?
Very true.
Yeah. When I lived in California, I remember a teacher assumed that we played our volleyball games at the beach for school, which is so not true.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just this misconception. But you came to the eastern part of the state, never left. Did you go right into that line of work, or did you have other?
No, actually, right after college, I was a paramedic with Lifeline Ambulance when they first started. And then I was there for a couple of years, and then I kind of transitioned to where I got interested in law enforcement, and positions came up in East Wenatchee, and I took the test and got hired.
So you weren't from East Wenatchee, you came here for the job?
Yeah, I came here to work with Lifeline Ambulance as a paramedic to begin with.
And then you got to stay.
Yeah.
So when you go through the academy, if you go through the academy and live in East Wenatchee, does that necessarily mean you're going to work in East Wenatchee?
Right. Yeah. When you go to the academy, you're hired by that agency to go through the academy. So then you're going to be commissioned to work with that agency. But even though it's a state commission, you're supposed to stay with that agency. But a lot of people don't, including myself.
You could go on to other things.
Right.
When you decided to go, so you were in service, you worked as a paramedic and then decided to work as a police officer.
Right.
So you had enough experience by showing up on the scene as a paramedic.
Correct.
To know kind of what you were getting into.
Oh, I did. I wanted to get into something less stressful.
Being a police officer was
Yeah.
less stressful than a paramedic?
It actually is true.
And what was it like for you, the difference between what you thought it would be like to be a police officer and what it actually was in the beginning?
Well, I think definitely there's a lot more report writing than what you think. When you first get into law enforcement, you think it's just, going out there and driving your car and responding to calls and that's it. But there's a lot that has to do with report writing, that a lot more than you think.
When something goes down, you have to give that information in detail.
Right.
Even a simple pullover, traffic violation, that's more straightforward.
Yeah, that's more
but
straightforward. But I'm talking about when you're responding to calls and you're dealing with an issue, and there's a lot more documentation than I thought there was.
Because you don't know if that particular case is going to end up in a court system or
Right.
what kind of documentation you need.
Right. Exactly.
So they teach you how to do that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You talked about the paperwork that you couldn't have anticipated. What about the safety issues? Were there times that you felt you were in danger? Was it not as dangerous as you thought it would be? What about that aspect of the job?
Well, during the academy training, they really, work on the being safe, and how to do your job safely and to, protect yourself and other people that you're working with. So, you get a lot of training with that. So I felt fairly comfortable with that. But yeah, there were times where, I walked into situations that were certainly, not safe, but that was part of the job, so I expected that. But part of my career with East Wenatchee, when I was working there, I was actually a canine officer. So for a long period of time with East Wenatchee, I had a dog with me. So that had that added, protection type of, feeling that I had with the dog. So, I was going into a lot more unsafe situations because I had the dog.
So it's different than if you had a person as your partner, or you had a partner and the dog.
Right. Yeah.
So you worked with someone else and you both had the dog.
Yes.
So you were both put in
Right.
situations that might be a little heightened
Right,
because of that.
And the dogs are trained to alert, for unsafe, situations and stuff like that. That how the dog's reacting. Okay, there's somebody probably in here hiding. So
Things that you couldn't pick up on yourself.
no.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
When you made the transition to Wenatchee Police Department from East Wenatchee, what took place there and why the switch?
Well, it was back in 1999, and at that time I knew, that Wenatchee was growing and expanding their police force. So, I got to know a lot of the police officers, the administration for Wenatchee, and it just, it felt like the right thing to do. Of course, there was a financial aspect to it. It was a little bit, better pay, and the way they did their shifts for patrol was a little bit more enticing for me. So that was probably the main reason.
Did you have the K-9 partner all through your East Wenatchee work?
Probably the majority of it, maybe minus 2 years, but yeah.
So then when you transitioned to Wenatchee, no longer, you didn't have a K-9 partner any longer?
No, the dog retired before I switched over.
So how was that adjustment? Did you miss having?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I had the dog with me as a pet, when I moved over to Wenatchee, and the dog always he'd sense when I was getting ready to leave to go to work, and he would get all
He wanted
excited.
to go with
Yeah, he
you.
wanted to go with.
And so how do they decide whether or not you have a K-9? So if that one retires, can't you then get another one, or how do they determine?
You could, but at that time, Wenatchee Police Department didn't have canines.
Got it.
Yeah.
So they weren't part of that, part of
No.
your training or part of your work.
No.
What was the difference between East Wenatchee and Wenatchee? Just in terms, do you only stay on this side of the river, and then if you're in East Wenatchee, obviously you don't cross the river, or sometimes does that cross over?
Oh, that crosses over quite a bit. There's a misconception about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, all that means is that, you're responsible for that area for calls and preventing crime in that area, but you have a statewide commission as a police officer. So, in some aspects you could easily just cross the river and enforce laws if needed. It's not something you do consistently, but if it has to happen, then it happens, and it's not an issue.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to dig a little deeper into some of the things you've seen over the years in your job and how those things have prepared you to be an investigator, since that's what you're doing with your spare time now.
Sounds good.
We're talking with Jim West. He is a retired police officer from Wenatchee. He also spent some time in East Wenatchee as a police officer, and now he's retired and owns West Investigations. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, today we're talking with Jim West from West Investigations. He spent time as a Wenatchee police officer, also in East Wenatchee for a bit, and he's sharing his wealth of information. I have some questions for you that only you could answer as a retired policeman.
I'll do what I can.
And then we're going to get to your investigation part. I have a friend whose son was about to get pulled over, or it looked like maybe getting pulled over, and he'd never been pulled over before, young. I think he was 17 at the time.
Uh-huh.
And he was telling us a story, and he said, I was near the house, but the police officer seemed like he was following me, so I just kept driving around because I didn't really know what to do. And I said, why didn't you just go home? Like, why didn't? Because then you look more suspicious because you're driving all around the neighborhood and not picking a place to stop. So then he did pull him over. Said that the light in the rear view mirror, or in the rear view window, was out, which I don't know if the taillights are working, if you can really get a ticket for having that light out. But it was his reason for stopping him, and then found out that the kid was just nervous and he didn't give him a ticket. And when the officer was walking away, he said, well, what do I do now? Are you giving me a ticket? He goes, you want a ticket? Like, I'm letting you go. But if you've never been pulled over, for the kids who are younger or people just starting to drive, it can be a little scary, especially these days. You get warned, like, don't be in a dark place. What do you do? How do you handle it if you're going to get pulled over? So what's your advice for parents to give their kids advice about how to handle that? Because there is no training for it.
Right. Well, first, in that scenario, obviously driving around in circles is going to catch the attention of most police officers are out, looking to try to prevent some type of criminal activity. So, I mean, in that scenario, he should have just gone home, and that would have been the simplest thing. But then he got stopped. I've never stopped anybody for a review light or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever that was. I don't even know what that is, but yeah, I mean, my best advice is if you get pulled over by an officer is just, be calm, don't freak out, and stay in your car. Don't fidget around and grab from different areas and move around a lot in the car, because that's going to heighten, the suspicion of the officer that you're trying to get a weapon or you're trying to hide something that's, criminal. So, it's best just to sit there, be calm, be polite, and, just let the officer do their job. And if you have an issue with the traffic stop or the demeanor of the officer or what have you, the time to argue about that or express your concerns is not there. Okay, wait, go home, think about it first. And if you still have an issue about it, you call that office wherever the law enforcement officer works and talk to their supervisor about it.
That's the most constructive way.
Yes.
So to further that, you must get really good instinctively at knowing, for example, I was pulled over a couple of months back, and it was about almost 1 a.m, and I had literally been at a friend's house with our kids who were home from college playing board games. No wine, no partying, no nothing, but it was, almost 1 a.m.
Right.
And I was going 5 or 6 over the speed limit. So we're told, civilians are told, that when you're out and about at that hour, they're kind of looking to see, if someone's drinking or not. And he
Yep.
approached the door and said, "Where are you coming from?" And I said, "Playing board games with our kids." And he said, "All right," and just gave me a warning and went on his way. And so I wonder if you just kind of get a sense when, as soon as you see someone, if they're sitting there calm and realize, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was going 6 miles over the speed limit," or whatever, you get a sense, you have an intuition as you've done it so much.
Right. Yeah, you can get it, when you contact somebody that's been driving and say if they're under the influence of something, once you've seen that and dealt with that type of stop before, you get a sense right when you get up there that, okay, this is that issue or it's not. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's true.
And how to handle that.
Correct.
So being calm and knowing, I felt a little nervous. I thought, man, I wouldn't drink and drive, but I can see why if you get stopped at 12:30 at night, that would be the assumption probably.
Yeah, that's true. That's what they're looking for.
Haven't been playing board games with your kids, but in my case I was. So that was
Uh-huh.
good. So talk about the things that are, what's the advice you can give to people? There are some stores in town, for example, I won't say what they are, that I have a friend who used to work at the jail, and he says, don't ever go to these stores alone. Don't go at night. There's the typical things. Don't be messing with your phone when you're coming to the car from a parking lot. When you get in the car, lock the door. Just always be aware instead of handling a device. What are some of the things that just a step further that you could tell us because you have a greater knowledge than we do?
Well, I think one of the best advice I can give people is that don't get complacent because you're living in Wenatchee, because there's a lot that a lot of people don't know. I mean, there is a lot of crime in Wenatchee. This is not Mayberry. There's a lot of activity going on that you don't know about, and people become victims sometimes because they're being complacent and not being self-aware of where they are, what time they're in that place, and actually, paying attention to their surroundings. So, there are areas in the city that, you would want to be a little bit more cautious than others. But I think if you had more of a broad awakening of, being conscientious that you could be victimized anywhere in the city of Wenatchee, you're better off.
That way your guard isn't down. You don't
Correct.
assume that because you're not going to the couple of places that they talk about,
Right.
that you can have that added layer of safety.
Right, yeah.
And if you encounter something, I think it would be frightening. I've seen it happen, and I've seen it on my social media thread when something's going on and then a person pulls out their camera and they start filming what's happening. I would think that would be maybe the worst idea, to try to record a crime or record something that's happening that's none of your business, because it puts you in added danger, besides just being a witness to something. What do you think of how people are using not the officers, but how people using their cell phones when witnessing a crime, when being part of a crime, when getting pulled over? How does that affect the job?
Well, I think first off, if you're witnessing a crime and you're going right to your phone just to film it, I think that's a problem.
That's a problem.
You might want to try calling 911 first, at least, getting help on the way, and then, if you did that and you're seeing something happen and you think filming this incident would be helpful to law enforcement as far as, description of suspects, potential witnesses and such like that, that's actually a good thing.
As long as you're not putting yourself in danger.
Correct.
Because I'd imagine if someone's committing a crime and sees you filming it,
Yeah,
that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, they
right?
might focus on you. So
Exactly.
Yeah, you got to
Shift
be
that
real careful.
focus.
Yeah.
And as far as people pulling out their phones when they're being pulled over, have you ever had that happen?
Yes, I have.
How do you feel about that? You don't care?
It didn't bother me because I thought, yeah, I'm filming you too. So
Yeah.
it's I don't it doesn't bother me none. Most officers really don't really care because 90% of the time, whatever is being filmed is going to exonerate whatever claim is usually made against an officer. Usually,
So it's to your advantage
it's to the officer's advantage to actually have something videoed. Yeah.
And are all stops videoed from cars now?
Most of them, I don't. I know for Wenatchee Police Department they are, just based on because I just left there and I know what they have. But so I can safely say, yeah, definitely Wenatchee Police Department.
So 2 years you've been retired now. No. May was retirement.
Yeah.
Ray was retirement, and you retired from Wenatchee Police Department, spent some time at East Wenatchee Police Department.
Yeah.
So I want to take a break and hear about what you're up to with West Investigations and just see what you learned as an officer that you implement now. And
Sure.
I want to, do you do stakeouts and stuff? I want to know this stuff.
Okay.
We'll take a break. Hi, we're back. We've been talking with Jim West. He's a retired police officer for Wenatchee Police Department. He also worked in East Wenatchee for a bit of his career. He now owns West Investigations, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how that happened. So we didn't mention yet that you are married to, you can tell me a little bit about.
Well, I'm married to Ruth Esparza. She's a local attorney in town. She started her own firm last year. She's also a city councilwoman with the city of Wenatchee.
And so you had retired last May.
Correct.
And had you planned to start a private investigation firm, or how did that,
No.
You said it kind of ended up happening in conjunction with her starting her firm.
Yeah, she started her firm last year, and her business got a lot busier than we anticipated, so she was, kind of looking, maybe I should hire somebody else to come in and help, and work with her. So about that same time, I got my letter from the state of Washington that I was actually eligible to retire. So I was at the minimum age, I had enough time in. So originally I was, thinking I was going to try to do 30 years in law enforcement, and this was my 27th. So then I did the math, looking at, okay, if I stayed to 30 years, how much money is that going to gain me? And it wasn't much.
Right.
So then we started thinking, well, what if, I retire and then work with Ruth, kind of help her be like a paralegal, try to help her with her firm, that kind of thing. And so we started doing some research on that, and we actually started talking to some other attorneys in town, and almost all of them mentioned, you know what, it's too bad you're not going into private investigations because it's really needed here, because there really isn't much available for that. So we thought about it and did some more research, and I realized that I could help Ruth, I could retire, and I could open up my own business and actually be better off than if I stayed that 30-year mark for law enforcement.
Well, and also you're moving toward that more flexible quality of life, the
Right.
things that sometimes people wait to retire too long, and then they've worked right into those years that could have been golden.
Yeah, and I haven't set my alarm clock since May. I get up, and when I get up, and I like to kid my fellow law enforcement officers that are still working. I tell them that every day's a Saturday.
It's true. Well, I work for myself and have for a very long time, and when my son left for college, I thought, that was one of the things that I was going to try to, like the list of the good, the pros and the cons, and there were so many cons to him leaving home, but one of the pros was that I didn't have to set an alarm either. So On the days that I don't have to, i.e. that I'm not going to kickboxing or something, then I like that too.
Right.
You end up waking up about the same time.
Close.
But you
yeah.
don't have to.
Exactly.
That's a nice thing.
Big difference.
So West Investigations, tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do. So you obviously work for local attorneys. That was an advantage to having
Yes.
those connections. Who are the different types of people that hire you besides attorneys, and what's the type of work you do? You think, like, I imagine the movie Stakeout and those kinds of things from back in the day. I'm sure it's not nearly as
No, there's a little
cinematic
bit of
as that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. But right now, the majority of my work is probably doing background investigations for employment. For government agencies, for companies. That seems to be a big chunk of my time. I'm doing quite a bit of litigation support for attorneys that they're hiring me to, locate witnesses and interview them. I do a little bit of the stakeout stuff, when you have, especially in family law, you'll have one side saying the other side's doing this, and then that side, oh, no, I'm not. And then, I'll go out there and see, what's actually going on, because, when I go out and do it, I can, be a third-party witness, basically. And whatever I see is evidence, for whatever the civil issue is.
How much did your history as a police officer prepare you? Because some people are investigators and were never police officers.
Right.
So how do you think, what is that advantage for you?
Well, during my career, probably 12 to 14 years, I was in some form of detectives. I was detectives in Wenatchee for about 6 years, and a lot of that had to do with major crimes. And then I was a detective sergeant, so I supervised detectives for several years. And then, I became captain, and I was in charge of the North Central Washington Special Investigations Unit. So I've got a wealth of actual investigation training and experience, which I think is huge, especially when you're, doing an investigation, obviously.
Can you imagine doing your job without all of that?
No, you wouldn't.
And all those skills?
You wouldn't be as effective, no way.
And so that's what you bring
Right.
to this job.
Mm-hmm.
And so for people who want to reach out to you, your website is westpi.net.
Right.
You own West Investigations.
Mm-hmm.
We have just a minute. So if you're not an attorney, and you're not someone hiring you from a government entity, who are the people who hire you?
People have come to me, like if they're trying to locate like a lost relative, that they've lost contact with or connection with. I've had that a few times, and I have, with my private investigator license, I have access to databases that the general public does not. So I can really
That social media can't cover. Right?
Correct. So I can dig deep to try to locate people, for that. So I would say that's the main thing that people come to me for.
Well, if people want to get in touch with you, again, the website is westpi.net, West Investigations. I'm glad to have you on the show. We've been running into each other at happy hours for a while.
I know.
So that's why I guess it seemed like it's been a couple years, but the time goes fast. So
It does.
you just retired in May. So best to you.
Yeah.
Enjoy your
Thank you.
retirement. Stay safe.
Yeah, I will.